How's it going? My name's Jam Fan. This is going to be a little bit longer of a video. It's going to be in a podcast style video. There won't be a lot of visuals, so feel free to just throw your headphones on or walk around, do something else. I will put a audio only version in the description below, along with any relative articles from this episode. But this is about a radio talk show host by the name of Mike Gallagher. He's normally talks about politics, and he started talking about this article which this columnist put out. Actually, it was about 10 years ago that the article came out, but the show was just last week. And really, in my opinion, he uses this article as a way to confirm his own stigmas against gamers. And I was listening to his show on the way to work one day and heard this segment, and I was a little bit upset about it, but that's why I'm doing the video, so we'll get into it.
This is the Mike Gallagher Highlight Show. And here we are again with the Mike Gallagher Highlight Show. Mike's announcer Peter Reif here, and this hour we look back at a debate about the nature of men, especially young men, in today's American culture. Mike spoke to journalist Kay Heimowitz about what she views as the modern American man boy. Well, here's Mike and Kay.
You know, in the middle of all this political conversation and the kind of social issues we like to tackle on this show, one of my favorites of all time is a subject that doesn't make a lot of headlines. And it's something that hasn't happened overnight. This is a gradual process, incrementally. But I love talking about the way we have feminized our men, the feminization of men, and the incredible process of making men into sort of a weird hybrid called the child man. You know, it's one thing to talk about the way we're not allowed to have the masculine application to men anymore. It's also another to examine the 26-year-old guy in America. Kay Heimowitz did that in a column written for City Journal. Kay is a contributing editor of City Journal, and she's the William E. Simon Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Her latest book is Marriage and Caste in America, and she wrote a column that I absolutely loved, and I read it 2 or 3 times, and I thought, I got to get Kay on the show. The article is called Child Man in the Promised Land, and it's great to welcome Kay Heimowitz to the Mike Gallagher Show. Kay, how are you?
I'm just fine, thanks.
I really appreciate your time and joining us. Congratulations on a great piece, Child Man in the Promised Land. And I love what you say about the 26-year-old single white male in the 21st century. You finish college, you work in a cubicle. In your spare time, you play basketball with your buddies. You live in an apartment with some guy friends. You download the indie tunes from iTunes. You play the Xbox 360. You take a shower after work. You massage some product under your hair and face. Then it's off to the bars and the parties. But in 1965... you're a 26-year-old guy. You have a factory job. Maybe you work for an insurance broker. You're married. You probably have been for a few years. You met your wife in high school. You've already got a kid. Another one's on the way. You're renting an apartment in your parents' 2-family house, but you're saving up for your own ranch house in the next town. Yup, you're an adult. Kay, it brilliantly captures where we've gone with and what has emerged as you call it, the child man.
Well, that's
All right, so a couple things here. So I don't know where he's getting this feminization of men. I definitely agree to some point that men are, I guess, less manly as they used to be, at least how they're portrayed in media. Now you see a lot more, I guess, feminization of men. There is a certain aspect of that that's true, but I don't understand what that has to do with getting married later, having children later, and ultimately what does it have to do with video games, which is really just it's a hobby. I don't understand why this, and I shouldn't say I don't know for sure, but here's my take on it. You have a guy, Mike Gallagher, who goes, there he is. This guy essentially is in his 50s. He's a radio talk show host, very smart guy. Mostly tackles the subject of politics, and for him, video games were something that maybe started out on the Atari system. That was the first system that you could bring home and hook up to your TV. And then you had the arcades. And generally speaking, an arcade would be a place where, the preteens and maybe up to the 16, 17-year-old kids would hang out. And probably by the time that he was graduating from high school, only kids played video games. They were meant for kids. And then you had the 90s, where the whole video game industry was marketed purely to kids. And I grew up in that time. I grew up in the time when everything, during the NES and SNES time, where everything was Super Mario. You had Kirby. You had you had Pokemon. A lot of these games that were marketed towards young kids, young boys, and that was just who they chose. They could have just as easily chose young girls, or both sexes at the time. And so for us, video games were something that we grew up with. And the point that I want to make, and that he clearly doesn't understand, is the fact that games have grown with us. That's one of the big things. So the marketers and gaming creators, developers, they knew that their target audience was growing up, that, maybe when we first started out, that it started out as, young elementary to the end of high school age. And then as our generation continued to grow up, we still wanted to play games. And it was something that we grew up with. It was our main hobby. And so the games started to become more complex, and the stories became more complex, and you had characters that were complex. You had professional actors that were going into these games and making very realistic voiceovers so that the characters were more believable. And if it were only for children, if you've ever watched a children's show, the first thing that you'll notice is that the actors are typically subpar. They're not usually the best actors, because children generally don't notice that kind of thing. If you go back and you watch some of the movies that you watched, as a child growing up, Mighty Ducks is one that comes to mind. Mighty Ducks is one that comes to mind for me. And I go back and I watch that, and it was a movie that I loved growing up. And now I go back, and those child actors were just horrible. I mean, it's pretty funny. But so my point is that these games have definitely grown more and more complex. It's not just all fantasy. As of late, we've seen a lot of games come out about the First and Second World Wars, and how you can actually, it can spark an interest for someone that wants to learn about history, and so forth. So he makes these comparisons for the 26-year-old guy that's in America today, and then he makes a comparison to the 26-year-old. Well, I guess to be fair, it was the author of this article. And she makes this comparison to a 26-year-old in 1965 who apparently at that point has a factory job is an insurance broker, married, met wife in high school, one kid, another on the way, and renting an apartment in your parents' 2-family house. So I guess like a maybe like a loft apartment or something with separate entry, and you're saving for a ranch house in the next town over. You're an adult. And I guess this is their definition of what an adult would be, someone that has a real job, which most 26-year-olds, I work with many 26-year-olds. I'm not that much older than that myself. And I have a real job with a 401k, with a good pay. I have my own car, my own apartment, and I play games as a hobby, and that's what I feel like this host is doing, is he is using this article to really just attack adult males that play video games. He has this preconceived idea in his mind that video games are for children, and as a 26-year-old, why are you still single, and why don't you have any children, and why are you playing video games? Maybe video games are to blame, and that's the problem. Like, you see this type of thinking a lot, where somebody wants to add a simplistic answer to a complex question. So they say, well, video games must be the issue. Just to give you a little bit of context, this article was written in 2008. And so that's why you hear this consistent reference to Xbox 360. But this show was actually from like last week. So I don't know why he picked this article out of, maybe she just had that book come out that he was talking about, but this article's 10 years old. Why is he even talking about it? Okay.
Right, we've seen an enormous change over the last 30 years or so in the way that we organize our lives. This, of course, applies to women as well. We're marrying much later, having children later. And what I wanted to look at was what the impact of this delayed marriage had on men, because I think it has had a very specific impact on them.
So notice that, I think that she's a little bit more of the sane mind in this regard, because she is actually saying, well, women are not getting married as quickly either. They're not having children as quickly either. But her article is focused on men. He doesn't ever even bring up women, or the fact that, hey, a lot of women are playing video games. A lot of streamers are actually female, and they're playing video games. And apparently he has no clue.
There is an enormous cultural machine out there that's out there to entertain young men. We've got Maxim magazine. We've got the Cartoon Network at night is only targeting these guys, and they're watching in great numbers. We've got an enormous video game industry these are their primary consumers. That is the guys between about 20 and 34. So you have this delay. You have this long period of time where guys are single without a lot of responsibilities outside their jobs, and by the way, they are working hard, a lot of them, but without much family responsibility, to be sure, and with a little money in their pockets too, and they're spending it on pleasuring themselves.
I absolutely get embarrassed, and I hate to say this out loud, because I'll bet you a bunch of 30-something young men are going to be calling and calling you and me, old fuddy-duddies, and we don't get it. I get embarrassed when I see a 30-year-old or 28-year-old single guy infatuated with the latest Xbox 360 game. I'm embarrassed for him. Is it an overstatement to say that it has a lot to do with sort of a degree of immaturity that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago?
Well,
all right, listen to his question. Okay, first of all, he says that he's embarrassed, or the 26-year-old guy that's obsessed with the latest Xbox 360 game. All right. And then, secondly, he says, is this because there's, less mature people now? That's literally what his question was.
Is it an overstatement to say that it has a lot to do with sort of a degree of immaturity that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago?
A degree of immaturity that didn't exist 20 or 30 years. Are you serious? You're just trying to write it off as like everybody now is less mature than you were when you were 26? Are you serious? Oh my God. What a stupid question.
Well, it
Talk about it oversimplification, man.
certainly has something to do with a lot of free time that didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago,
Right.
because you simply weren't in a position to spend that much time on this stuff. I want to be careful not to just say, "Oh, if you play video games, therefore you are a child man." I've gotten a lot of angry mail from men like who have something to say about that. You'll probably hear from them as
I will,
well.
I'm sure.
And I think they have a point. That in and of itself is not a defining factor, but it is one in a whole series of changes that we've seen in the way young men are spending their time. And
Okay, so and give her a little credit. Like I said, I think she's the one that with a little bit, with a little more sane thought on this. She says that she wants to be careful that not every person that is that age that plays video games is a child man or whatever. Well, he kind of dismisses it as you listen later on in the show. And then she said that, before that, she said that it has to do with having a lot more free time on your hands. Well, I'm sorry that I didn't go off and get married and have children that I couldn't afford. If you're a hardworking parent that plays video games and that's what you do, and you go to work for your kids, more power to you. I have a lot of respect for you. I grew up in a time, where my parents had my older brother and myself at 23 and 25 by the time I was born, and it was two kids that they couldn't afford. We grew up, my parents working long hours and my dad working as hard as he could, and we didn't have the latest and greatest of everything. And like I said, I love my parents to death. I have a lot of respect for them, and I'm glad that we got what we got. I'm not ungrateful by any means, but I learned that if you have children early. And even my dad will agree with me on this. If you have children early, you're going to struggle financially, and you're not going to be able to do all the things that you want to do. Now, by the time that I was 26, I had visited Germany, and in the few years after that, I was able to go to Vienna, Austria, and spend months overseas working for leadership in a church over there, and I've had experiences that my parents will never have. And I was lucky to take advantage of my youthful energy and take advantage of my free time and my lack of responsibilities. That's not necessarily a bad thing not to have responsibilities. I wasn't tied down by a mortgage or, car payments and all this kind of stuff. I put that type of obligations to the side, and I decided that I wanted to see the world. And again, video games has never been something that was even a thought. I didn't even play when I was over there because I was too busy. It's just been a hobby. And that's why I think these older adults in their 50s and 60s, they don't understand it. They don't understand that this is no more a hobby than, how is this different than the good old days, right? What were they doing then? They had cars. Cars were a big thing, hot rods, building cars. Maybe they liked model cars. That was a huge thing among younger kids and even adults. I've seen adults that still, this is the perfect example, train sets. Have you ever seen those shows or videos on the people that have those enormous train sets, the model train collections? And again, more power to you. If that's what you love to do, if that's your hobby, and it keeps you, it's a nice healthy outlet for you, then great. And it's like these guys are now in their 50s and 60s, and they've been able to afford all the things that they want to afford, including their enormous train sets that they have out in the garage. And so I just don't see what the difference is. And if my hobby is building computers, which I'm recording all this on, audio, broadcasting on Twitch, and gaming, which is simply a form of entertainment, then why the attack? Why the label, and why the attack?
And what I think is very striking is that it's not just that people are getting married, that is saying I do, but it means that they're less attached to other people, to social institutions. So they're not they have no tight connection to family. They are less likely to be involved in religious institutions and civic organizations and that sort of thing. So it keeps them very isolated from the larger social community.
But you all
okay, wrong. In the word of President Trump, wrong. She said that you are less connected socially. I've made so many friends on Twitch, and I've made so many friends through gaming, and a lot of I've met people now in real life, and have created relationships in real life from gaming. And I am involved in my religious organization. If I wanted to be involved in civics or politics, I could. Maybe that's something for me down the road. But no, sorry, you're wrong. You're wrong.
Also write that women are wondering, where did this creature come? How did he come to be? And you write about a theory that feminist-influenced academics and cultural critics who view this kind of, crude dude media as symptoms of a backlash, it's a masculinity crisis. And see, that's what I loved about your column and your thinking in this piece, because I really think we're in a crisis of masculinity right now.
Okay, so this whole masculinity thing, again, I think it's a completely different subject line. It has nothing to do with gaming. So we're just going to skip through this part.
But I think that, what I also said in the piece is that I think that the resistance of men to, if I can use the word, sort of normal bourgeois life, normal family life,
right,
is a long-term thing. It's gone on forever. Women have always complained about it. Men have found outlets in various sorts of, Playboy magazine, for instance, or even less controversial things like Field and Stream magazine. They
right,
had their activities going hunting or whatever, or going, watching football.
So she says that this has been an issue for a long time for women, apparently, where I guess guys aren't paying attention to them, and they're more obsessed with their Maxim magazines and Playboy magazines. With, if you're not familiar with Maxim, it's essentially just a men's magazine with scandalously dressed women and da-da-da-da-da. And Field and Stream, and she said less controversial, like Field and Stream. And she says they've always found their outlets, and this is the point that is completely skipped over by the host, by Mike Gallagher. He completely this completely goes over his head that there have been outlets for men, and just because you don't agree with this outlet doesn't make these men boys.
Now I think because we have this long period where men are on their own and really don't have to settle down, this media has really kind of exploded in forms that are not always so easy for women to accept.
Kay Heimowitz is our guest. She wrote a great article at City Journal that I really appreciated, and I wanted to get her on the program for a little bit. And let's open up our lines and see if you have some questions or comments for Kay. She wrote a piece called "Child Man in the Promised Land," and it's just a fascinating reflection. I mean, Kay, I cannot tell you how many friends I have. I've got friends with 26, 27-year-old kids living at home, single guys, going out to the bars and the parties on the weekends, living with mommy and daddy. And it's like you want to shake them and say, hey, kid, when are you going to grow up? When are you going to settle down? When are you going to get that job where your aspiration is to buy a house and to be an adult? And you talk again all through this piece about this perverse creature called the child man. It's everywhere I go. I know so many families who, mom and dad are like, man, when are you moving out?
Well,
So one cultural part of America that I haven't really understood is this push to, at 18, to get out of the house and go basically put yourself in debt, because that's essentially what happens, but go find independence. Now, if you're 18 and you want to get out and you want to get an apartment with your friends, while you go to college or whatever, that's fine. But there's a lot of cultures around the world where, they aren't necessarily kicking their kids out and the kids stay around and they continue to help with the home and the chores, and they know their parents can't do everything, so they stick around a little bit longer than normal. And then if you actually look at what rent costs today, and what it takes to put down money on a house, in the 1950s, you could buy an entire house for like $11,000. I mean, it was insanity. So and nowadays, the college itself, you have to get loans just to go to college, and you have to put down enormous amounts of money and have immaculate credit in order to get a house. So things is not exactly comparing apples to apples. And if you are at home and you're 26 or 28 or whatever age that they feel is too old to be at home, and you have zero aspirations to go out on your own, and you have zero aspirations to be independent, then maybe you're the person that they're talking about. But for the average person, the average guy between this age group, I don't think that's the case. I think, if you're at home and it makes sense for you financially to be at home, and you're helping out and you have a good job, or you're going to school, like, I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see this, again, I noticed that it killed my parents financially to have their own place and kids, when they both weren't, well, my dad was finished with school, but my mom wasn't finished with school at the time. It was like, it killed them financially. And so a lot of parents actually tell their kids, you know what, if you can be here a little bit longer and save up some more money, then, more power to you, as long as you're helping out. And no one should be stumbling back into their parents' house, wasted drunk after dropping out of school and, no job. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But if you're doing all the right things, then I don't see why you should be giving your hard-earned money to a stranger when rent prices are through the roof, rather than living at home and helping out the family.
You know what, Mike? There's something they can do about that.
Yeah, tell me about what we did. We had 4 of those boys, and we kicked them all out, one by one. Time to get out in the world, son.
You're tuned to the Mike Gallagher Highlight Show. We're going to continue Mike's conversation with journalist Kay Heimowitz about.
Yeah, women are saying, I don't want a relationship with this man child. This guy that can't stop.
I know,
and of course we've hit a nerve with the video.
I know plenty of guys that play games and have girlfriends. So I really don't know what he's talking about.
Video games.
Plenty of guys are playing games, building computers with their girlfriends. So again, a little out of touch here, Mike.
I knew we'd get in trouble. Yeah. Here we go. Mike, you're on with Kay Heimowitz. Hi, Mike.
Okay, so Mike is a caller that's calling in, and I want you guys to really listen to this guy. He seems like a very reasonable guy. Essentially, his story is that at one point he made a mistake and got a DUI. And so rather than going out to the bars now, he uses video games as his outlet and his entertainment source, so that he doesn't go out and drink. And I think it's a very healthy alternative to someone that's had a problem with alcohol. And I'll go over the reasons that he mentions right after this, but just listen to how the host just attacks him for it and has, again, really no respect for this guy calling in.
Mike.
Oh,
hi.
My point is, I'm a 30-year-old guy, father of 2.
Yeah.
I got a DUI from a couple of years ago. It's all been taken care of. I look at the video game thing as my thing to get away, to relax. And my fiance is cool with it because she knows where I'm at. I'm not getting in trouble with the law.
So you're playing video games so you won't drive drunk?
Well, it was just a bad experience, and I learned from my mistakes, and I don't want to ever have to go down that road again, and I use my video games as my getting away, saving money. Yeah, a game might cost me $60, but a night at the bar would cost me $100 to $150.
Well, why don't you read a book?
Video games are my thing. I mean, there's all different kinds of games, and most of my friends game also. And also on the other line, some of these gamers, not myself, but other ones, this is their livelihood.
I know. Here we go about the game.
So he just hung up on him, by the way. The host just hung up on the caller. And where he was going with that is that some of these gamers this is their livelihood. And what I think he was about to say was that some gamers broadcast on Twitch and are YouTubers, and they make a full-time living from it. But of course, the host, being who he is, just simply hangs up on the guy, doesn't want any new information from him, just uses him as an example to what he thinks is proving his point. But it actually completely proved his point wrong. Here you have a guy that says he calls in. He's a father of 2, okay, living on his own with the fiance. This is the exact person that Mr. Gallagher basically said wasn't there. This is a guy. This is not a man boy. Okay, this is a guy that has a fiance. Like, he's about to be married. He has children. Yet he plays video games. Oh my, they exist, Mike. They're there. Okay, so this caller makes the point that he's saving money. There's no risk for him getting in trouble at the bar on the way home. His girlfriend knows where he is what he said. And I thought, you know what? The one thing he didn't mention was that means that he's available for the children. And you can say about fathers and men of the past that if they had problems with alcohol, guess what? They weren't available for the children. They didn't have an outlet like this. And that's a problem. So the host needed to give credit to video games in this sense. He needed to say, you know what? If this is the way for you to be at home and a way for you to be available for your children, then this is a good thing. Maybe I shouldn't attack it so hard. But instead, he asks him, why don't you read a book? Because I guess reading books as a hobby is just that much better than a video game. It's ridiculous. You have people that are involved in video games that are the 26-year-olds that are now developers, programmers, admins, involved in the networking, all these things, and they're gamers. The only place that I could see this man-child definition even working is someone that completely forgoes any responsibility and is way too old to be living at home. But video games has nothing to do with it.
They call them gamers. A lot of people take their
video
games
there's his label
very seriously. But as you write, unfortunately, a lot of young single men take their video games very seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I think the caller's point is worth attending to. That there are a lot of people who, you want an outlet, an escape after a long day of work, or
she gives him
after
credit.
a hard day dealing with the kids or whatever. I certainly have been known to watch a lot of trashy TV. When things are tough.
That's a good point.
But
watches
Kay,
trashy
we're talking
TV.
about guys. I know,
but he just wants to dismiss this whole thing and be like, well, video games though, video games. Why aren't help me out here, Kay?
Well, I shouldn't say this out loud, but again, I just cringe when I see grown men obsessing over, doomsday, or I'm going to pretend to be the monster gobbling up the whatever the heck it is. I mean, grow up, act like an adult, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Well, of course, when you're talking about obsession, that's something entirely different. But
who's talking about obsession?
A way of letting off steam, I don't see it as a big problem.
Well,
she says if you're just talking about letting off steam, then it's not a problem. And he continued. Listen to him continue to go on and just want to attack.
I don't know that it's a problem, but isn't it? It is a symptom, though. What you're right about, right? This child man syndrome.
Yes.
Child man syndrome.
That's all.
Child man syndrome.
In other words, I don't want to say that
he's
the guy
just in disgust. I mean, I don't know what his deal is. I mean, does he really have that much of a stigma against people that play video games? How is it any different with someone that binge watches Game of Thrones and lives their life vicariously through a character on a show, imagining themselves as that character? Because that's exactly the same thing. It's an outlet. It's for someone to just kind of escape all the issues that they're going with through the day. And then again, you have the entire other part of gaming now, which is broadcasting and being on Twitch and being on YouTube and being an entertainment source and quite literally, creating a living for yourself, much like what Mike does, much like what this host does on the radio. The internet and podcasts and YouTube and Twitch, I mean, they're coming up. They're coming up fast. So this guy's just completely out of touch. All right, thanks for watching, guys. I'm curious to know what your opinion is. Let me know. Do you think that you're a man boy? Or do you know someone that you would consider a man boy? Do you agree with the host, his mentality throughout the show, how he treated the caller? Do you disagree with him? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.